Chapter 4, From Chemistry to Energy to Life. The case study is about the Exxon Valdez, which was the largest oil spill up until 3 years ago when we had the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. On page 89, there's a paragraph here, so make sure you put an arrow to this paragraph that talks about ways that we clean up oil spills in the ocean. All right, next page, we talk about what bioremediation is. And bioremediation is when we clean up any kind of pollution, mainly oil, but also sometimes chemical pollution, through living organisms. We use mostly bacteria for bioremediation. And so they do that in oil spills. Page 91. By the way, chapter 4 is a kind of a review of other kinds of sciences that you've already been through. Biology, chemistry, earth science, and some physics. Alright, you need to know that the Earth's crust is made out of oxygen, silicon, aluminum, iron, calcium. And I've seen multiple choice questions on the AP exam where they say which one of these is the most abundant in the Earth's crust, but they don't have oxygen. They list these other ones, and so you have to know that of the other ones that they didn't list, the answer would be silicon. Kind of a tricky question. So you do need to know these. You also need to know the first three for air. You don't need to know oceans at this point and organisms. So you need to know the first five for the Earth's crust and the first three for air. Nitrogen is the biggest proponent of our air, and then oxygen, and then all the other gases mixed together. You do need to know the percentages for these ones, but not for this. So you need to know 78% here and 21% there. Nitrogen is a huge component of our atmosphere, but it has less density, so it's usually in the upper atmosphere, where oxygen is in the lower atmosphere with a higher density, and that's why we breathe oxygen down here. We have a lot of it down here to breathe. Page 92, you need to know the counterpoint to bioremediation is phytoremediation, and that's where plants take up toxins in their roots, and then you can dispose of the plants with the toxins in them. Make sure on page 93 you know what an isotope is and what a half-life is, and that is a review from chemistry class. On page 96, make sure you know the three properties of water here, the hydrogen bond and the cohesion and the water molecules. Make sure you know those. That is a review from not only biology but also chemistry as well. Alright, now we have lots of sticky notes on this page. Alright, at the top, make sure you know what a hydrocarbon is. A hydrocarbon is basically anything made out of fossil fuels. So, crude oil, plastics are a type of petroleum product. So that's plastic. It's a petroleum product. It's made out of a hydrocarbon. So natural gas and coal, these are your fossil fuels. And only carbon and hydrogen are in a hydrocarbons, hence the name hydrocarbon. These hydrocarbons are important because they release carbon into the atmosphere when they're burned, and that's what causes climate change. Carbon has created wealth and our modern lifestyle, so it's not all bad. There's been a lot of good that's come out of burning fossil fuels, but there's some things that we need to fix as well. Alright, under these sticky notes we have a pH scale. And so I have a sticky note here pointing to the pH scale. You need to know some of the common items. For example, you need to know that soap is alkaline and stomach acid is slightly basic. Those basic things on the pH scale, which is a review from not just chemistry but biology and 7th and 8th grade sciences, so you should know pH pretty well by now. What you may not remember from chemistry is that each number you go up on the pH scale, you have 10 times the hydrogen ion concentration, and that's really what pH means. H is hydrogen ion concentration. And so this is a number that you need to know. Sometimes you'll see a calculation using that, and I'll help you with that. All right, it's going back to carbon atoms. So we talk about carbon, releasing carbon when we burn fossil fuels. Well, these carbon atoms love to attach to each other and to other things, especially other things. They're very social. And so our fossil fuels are ancient living things full of carbon. And when we heat living things or fossil fuels, it breaks the carbon bonds and releases energy. So what happens is these broken carbons connect with two oxygens and make CO2, and that's where we get carbon dioxide from, burning fossil fuels and trees and things. So some CO2 gets dissolved in the oceans, which we're going to talk about. That's a problem because it's making the oceans acidic. We'll talk about that later. Some is taken in by trees, which is good, but there's too much of this carbon dioxide. And so most of it goes into the atmosphere and traps solar heat, which equals a warm planet. And that's the basics of global warming. All right, page 100 and 101 talks about DNA. The AP test requires you to know about DNA, but not the specifics. So we'll skip that. Going on to page 103, you need to know the difference between kinetic and potential energy. Make sure you know what chemical energy is, and know what the first and second laws of thermodynamics are, and what entropy is. And so these are kind of physics terms, 8th grade science terms also. Make sure on page 105 you know what an autotroph is, which is a primary producer that uses photosynthesis. We are not autotrophs. We are not producers. We do not use photosynthesis. Plants do, and algae does, and some bacteria do. This is a really good picture up here. This shows potential energy stored in the bonds of wood. This shows that as you burn the wood, you release kinetic energy. So potential energy is stored energy, kinetic is released. And the energy, now the first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be lost. It just changes form. And so this energy is changing form. It's changing form into light, and it's changing form into heat, but it's not lost. The second law of thermodynamics says that when you do change forms, it becomes less ordered. So it goes from a more ordered state to a less ordered state, and that is an increase in entropy. Page 106, make sure you know this equation. There's a big arrow pointing to the photosynthesis equation. Know that when you have photosynthesis, there's a net consumption of water. If you look here, you started with 12 H2Os, and you end with 6 H2Os, which means you lost H2Os, which means there was a net consumption. Water was consumed in the process. Make sure you know the equation for cellular respiration. Make sure you know that we are consumers. We're also called heterotrophs. We eat food for energy instead of photosynthesizing. Some other forms of energy. Now, most energy in the world comes from the sun, essentially through photosynthesis, and then is passed on. But there are other forms of energy as well. The gravitational pull of the moon, which creates tides, is a form of energy. The radiation inside the earth, let me move that, which causes plate tectonics, volcanoes, geothermal energy, deep sea vents. All of that is caused by the radiation in the earth, so this is a different kind of energy. And let's talk about deep sea vents. They're also called hydrothermal vents, and they use sulfur to create energy, and this is called chemosynthesis. So when you see an equation, like down here at the bottom of your page, that's the equation for chemosynthesis. And if you have a multiple choice question that asks you which one of these is chemosynthesis, look for the one with an S for sulfur, because it's the only one of these three, photosynthesis, cellular respiration, and chemosynthesis, it's the only one that uses sulfur. So look for the S for sulfur. Going on, you don't have to know any of this until that's actually the end of chapter 4 and what you need to know.